Hello, my name is Matthew Hantsbarger. In this video, I'll be presenting the work that was done by myself, Giovanni Maria Troiano, Alexandra, and Casper Harteveld, titled Alienated Serendipity and Collective Failure, exploring queer game mechanics and queerness in games via queer temporality. In this research project, we designed a game, implemented aspects of queer theory in the design, and playtested the game with a research through design approach to show how including and amplifying queer voices in discursive efforts around interactive technology design has implications that can broadly benefit game design, HCI research, as well as queer studies as a whole. In their essay, Finding Queerness in Games, the 2017 book Queer Game Studies, Colleen Macklin asks, do we find queerness in games when we play as queer-identified players and or form player communities? Or is a game queer when the designer crafts the game with queer intentions? Where is the queerness in game? This question is echoed across queer game studies. In attempting to answer this question, Naomi Clark identified two approaches to queer in games for exploring queerness, either within content and or representation, or in examining the structure of games. In Matt Knutson's essay, Backtrack, Pause, Rewind, Reset, Queering Chrononormativity in Gaming, he described how these two approaches were present in the video game Life is Strange. Regarding queer content, he wrote, over the course of the game, the two main characters strengthen their old friendship in a way that lays sexual tension on them, but neither they nor the game put a label on it. However, what he spends much more time examining is the mechanic of time manipulation as a queer game, writing, the defining mechanic of time reversal in Life is Strange implies a queer temporality, one that recognizes failure, grows past it in some ways, and accepts it in others, sometimes fatalistically. In our preliminary research, we found that outside of academic research, the topic of queerness in games was much more focused on queer content rather than queering the structure of games, and thus decided that by focusing on the latter, we could much more readily broaden the looted and narrative potential of it. With this focus in mind, we designed and playtested a game with the goal of creating a queer game in a way that was not just solely about including queer representation. To accomplish this, we decided to integrate aspects of queer theory into the mechanics and narrative of the game. Because queer theory is a broad field, we selected queer temporality as a topic that had existing research regarding its use in games, and because of that, had clear potential as a topic to explore with our game. Now, what is queer temporality? In contrast to chrononormativity, the ways in which time is bound to human bodies for its biological and political productivity, the concept of queer temporality describes how certain temporal experiences defy those notions, often focused on how the experiences of queer individuals exist in contrast to socially constructed norms regarding reproduction and life. This topic has great potential in games because of the ability to explore non-normative experiences with time. An example of this topic implemented in examining games is Queers in Love at the End of the World. The concept of Queers in Love at the End of the World is set as a text-based game with branching choices. However, the game ends after 10 seconds, with the end of the world arriving regardless of what the player says. The experience this mechanic creates is a unique one where the player can play and replay the game in a paradoxical, both with no time at all and yet with all the time in the world. With the concept of queer temporality as something we wanted to build off of, the game we developed was called You're Going to Be Late. It was a game developed in Twine in which the player plays as a child waking up in their house, who is instructed to get to school on time. Once the player begins the game, they are shown an in-game clock, a description of their surroundings, and a list of commands they can click on to navigate to other pages. The clock advances as they spend time in a room or navigate to other rooms. Once the player navigates to the front door and leaves the house, the day is over, and the game informs the player if they were late. The game then repeats this sequence as a new day. However, each day changes the environment, altering what paths the player has access to reach the front door. As the player plays through each day, their avenues for navigating from inside the walls of the house to the rest of the house close up one by one. Eventually, after enough days, the environment will change such that the player will be unable to reach the front door of the house, upon which the second half of the game begins. At this point, the player, unable to leave the house, is instead able to encounter two characters, and in conversing with them, attempt to figure out an escape from their predicament. The purpose of the design of the game is to create an experience of the player freeing themselves from a normative experience of time. The clock and stated goal of getting to school on time creates a pressure that is slowly made more and more difficult until it is rendered impossible. Upon becoming unable to complete this goal, the player is given the ability to break free, not by returning to trying to meet the original, but by escaping the house altogether and thus reaching the end of the game. After we designed the first prototype of the game, as part of the design process, we invited 5 queer participants to play our game and then asked them to follow up with a moderated discussion around our game and queer games more broadly in focus groups. For our study, we targeted a small sample size, in which our objective was to engage with queer participants in an in-depth discussion on queerness in games. We focused on recruiting participants with a higher than usual interest in games. In our 2 focus groups, we asked participants to share their experiences with the game, any feedback they had, as well as their perception of if and how the game expressed queer. We then asked our participants to provide and discuss examples of queer game mechanics they encountered in their previous experience. This allowed us to further inspire discussion around queerness in games and queer game mechanics. After collecting data from our research groups, we performed a thematic analysis and identified 3 major themes. The first, feeling horror through alienated serendipity. The second, introspecting as an act of queer liberation. And the third, queer game mechanics as queer modes of play. Regarding feeling horror through alienated serendipity, our participants described how alienation and confusion helped them engage with a horror game experience, but furthermore, how they saw this as an opportunity to subvert the mechanics of alienation into a sort of serendipity. Within introspecting as an act of queer liberation, our participants described how the sense of isolation and unnerving sense of the clock was a form of failure that they were able to find liberation from through introspection. And finally, with queer game mechanics as queer modes of play, our participants emphasized how queer modes of play can be found not just in intentional design from developers, but also systematically in the ways in which a player subverts the intended way of playing the game. The following quotes are from our participants, their observations during the focus week. Regarding the clock in our game, one of our participants said the following: the clock played 2 different roles in 2 different parts of the game, when you could get to school and when you couldn't get to school. When I was playing the first time, I ended up just clicking through everything just to try to get out in time. And so it was kind of like that kind of blinders effect, whereas as soon as you realize you can't get out in time, the clock kind of fades away, and it's still there, but it's no longer a pressuring element in the same way. This quote is an example of some of the discussion our participants had that fit into the first theme, feeling horror through alienated serendipity, and describes how the participants' changing perception of the clock as they play. We also have another quote here from another participant about their thoughts on what a queer mechanic was. I think for me, at least a subset of queer mechanics would be disruptive mechanics, where the game sets up a system, and the gameplay is disrupting that system in some way. Where so many games are about building a big thing, a game that takes an already complicated structure and then picks away. Our participants had a lot of discussion regarding what they regarded as queer gaming, and talked about how queerness could be found both in how games were designed, as well as how they were. Within our research, our goal was to develop a game to extend prior work on queer temporality, and to use that game to spark discussion around notions of queerness in games and queer gaming. Designing the game and collecting feedback reinforced both the reality that queerness is not a monolith, that there's a diversity of queer experiences, as well as the need to amplify queer voices and perspectives in games with HCI research. Overall, our game engaged participants with the intended player experience, but most importantly, with even a limited number of participants, our results exemplify how our participants consistently engaged with transformative and critical reflections around games, which has potential implications not only for game design, but for the design of HCI technology too. In particular, our paper shows that there is a need for more queer perspectives in HCI research to challenge what we consider average or general mindsets in audience. Thank you for your time.